good evening, everybody, and thanks for attending this Zoom presentation. And basically, it's probably a lot of birds that most of you are familiar with. You live so close to at least the foothills and into Yosemite and some of the higher reaches of the Southern Sierras. So hopefully some of the photographs will take you into other visits that you've had and some of the dialogue, and we'll look forward to the Q&A in the chat box when we're finished. So basically, as Rachel had said, I've have a company called Yellowbill Tours. I'm in my 24th year of leading field trips, and we do everything from Nome, Alaska, Beryl, Alaska, into Columbia, and a number of sites in between throughout Central America, Western United States, and a few of the Eastern states. And at the end, I'll show my website, and you can look at that on your own. But moving forward into the presentation, the Sierra Nevada is an area that we all love. I'm sure. I think I'd really be wrong by asking anyone who's attending tonight if they haven't been into the Sierras. It's just such a magnet and such a birdie area for us to go and spend a nice weekend. There we go. I had a funny window popping up I couldn't see, so I just minimized it. So the Sierra Nevadas is approximately 400 miles long from maybe Walker Pass, the other side of Lake Isabella out of Bakersfield, and going up just into Susanville, where approximately north of Susanville starts the Cascade Mountains. And the Sierra Nevadas are approximately 65 miles across. So we have a lot of habitat. We have a lot of different elevations. We have everything from sage to alpine, and it gives us a really interesting mix of birds. So the Sierra Nevada species is a typical distribution range map. I got this off of eBird. I'm sure all of us are familiar with eBird. It's really turned out to be such a tool, such a great app. Take it into the field with us, or if you're doing research at home, it has so many different files to go into and extract information. But here we are right here. I think you can see my cursor. I hope you can. Here's our Sierra Nevadas, and you guys are about down in here somewhere. And so you know where we're going. We're going to go see a Clark's nutcracker. Now, this is an alpine specialist. Has a very loud, harsh call. It's a really conspicuous bird at the higher elevations. It's a bird when I'm traveling east into the Sierras and maybe over Sonora Pass, or maybe even Walker Pass, and going north from Lone Pine up. You might see the bird or hear it. Basically, its prime food source is the white bark pine. And those of us that are involved in any type of conservation work, or like reading about conservation and different issues that affect our birds, the white bark pine is under a lot of pressure with the climate change and the new temperatures going up in the Sierra Nevadas on the east side and into the higher elevations. This particular pine is really dependent on the Clark's nutcracker to spread its seeds. It's the only way it can reproduce is through the Clark's nutcracker spreading the seeds. Here's another look at a Clark's nutcracker. I think this photo was taken somewhere around Mono Lake. The Clark's nutcracker is named after Captain William Clark of Lewis and Clark. The bird was first described as a woodpecker, and later the ornithologist Wilson felt it was a crow, and he named it Clark's crow. And it's an interesting factoid on this. In 2005, when the celebration for Lewis and Clark's expedition across the Rocky Mountains into the Columbia River drainage, there was a big presentation from the Smithsonian Institute. They had moved all of the Lewis and Clark collection into the Portland, Oregon Museum, and they had both the Clark's nutcracker and the Lewis's woodpecker, the original birds that were sent back east by Lewis and Clark, and they still had them, and they had them on display across, of course, in a glass case, but they still had the skins of those two birds that were, 200 years old. It was amazing to see that. Moving right along, Williamson sapsucker is another high elevation bird. It's a sapsucker. It's a woodpecker. They like lodgepole pines and sometimes in hardwoods. I've seen them in oaks in Evergreen Valley on the north entrance to Yosemite. It's a really very colorful bird, and they're also can be quite loud. Here's a female and the male. This photo was taken around Lake Tahoe. They're both on the same tree, and they had nestlings. So I got to spend some time just watching them feeding and coming back. You can see the insects in both their bills. Maybe not that good, but it gives you an idea of their food source. Here we are again. Williamson sapsucker is held into the Sierra Nevadas in California, goes up the Cascades into British Columbia, and of course throughout the Rocky Mountains and areas close to the Great Basin, down through New Mexico, and you can see where it winters. It goes all the way almost into the Yucatan. It follows the Sonora Mountain spine through New Mexico and Arizona, and that's where it spends its winter months and then heads on up into North America, the lower 48. I got this little window here again. Get rid of that. The black swift. I was just talking with Rachel a little bit about Yosemite and the crowds and birding in Yosemite and taking groups into Yosemite. It is always going to be an overused park. It's so popular. And of course, it's so close to tens of millions of people that we have in California that on the weekends, it can be very, very congested. For years, I was seeing black swifts using the waterfalls in Yosemite Valley. They nest behind waterfalls. And in the last few years, pre-COVID, if you will, they've been hard to find, if I have found them at all. What's really interesting is I'm seeing more and more white-throated swifts in the valley and less black swifts. Many years ago, maybe 35 years ago, I befriended one of the Yosemite Rangers, a ranger who was also a rock climber, and they brought him in for a few years from back east out of New England, and he was rappelling down into the only pair of peregrine falcons that were nesting in the park. Some of you may remember that. It goes back quite a ways. And what he found going into the peregrine falcon nest is the falcons were eating black swifts. He was finding remains of black swift in the nest that they were feeding to the offspring. The other interesting bird that he found in the nest was California gulls. When they were coming over the Sierra, I suspect, nesting in Mono Lake and coming over into the Bay Area in late summer, spend the winter. But here's our black swift. I can see it's very long wing. This is a chimney here in Marin County, and sort of not the world's greatest photo, but we do get a migration along the coast. So we do see them where I live in Marin County. Black swifts requires waterfall habitat for nesting, where they lay a single egg on a rock ledge. They use Yosemite waterfalls for breeding. I mentioned that a minute ago. This particular photo is out of Bernie McCarthy State Park, way north of you guys, probably about 600 miles north. They do nest annually, and it's a good place to see them regularly. I wouldn't go this year to Bernie McCarthy Park. The Park Service is rehabilitating the trail system down to the waterfalls and around the waterfalls, so everything's closed this season. So that's our black swift. Vaux's swift, as I mentioned earlier, is a swift of the forest using owl snags for nesting. The swift is a rare find east of the Sierra summit. This particular photo is from Marin County in the fall migration. We have an old brick yard that has a number of chimneys that haven't been laced with concrete, and the swifts use them, these 3 chimneys during the fall migration, and this is sort of what you get. But you can find Vaux's swifts, not in great numbers, both to the east side of the Sierra and the west side, going over the passes in the summer. Evening's a good time, or very early first thing in the morning when they're leaving the roost sites to go hunt, and then they come back in early evening, late afternoon. Midday, I don't know that you'll see them. I can't say that I've ever seen them midday, typically morning and very late afternoon. Vaux's swift. Red-breasted sapsucker is another favorite bird. It's found in the aspen groves of the Sierras. This is the real red super subspecies that a lot of people, I should say, birders like to think it's restricted maybe into Oregon and further north. These photos were taken around Mono Lake, around Tioga Pass and Tioga Levining Campground. Some of you may be familiar with that area. So red-breasted sapsucker, always a good summer bird. Look for them in aspen groves. One thing that always impressed me about the sapsuckers is their remarkable ability to have precise tap holes. And you can see, look at how this particular branch right here, it just has a whole series of holes. Here's a close-up, and they're all sort of evenly spaced and laid out. And they're really quite good about this, and I get a big kick out of it whenever I'm out looking for red-breasted sapsuckers. I pay more attention to the trees. They're a very quiet bird. Their tapping is very dainty. It's not like a woodpecker, like well, for instance, a pileated is very large, but here where I live, we get the nuttles, or even a downy has a larger tap drumming than the red-breasted sapsucker. So when I'm out in the field, and either on my own or with other people, I always look for tap holes in trees. It's always fun to watch them and find them, because they can be quite quiet. Flammulated owl. This is a really interesting little owl, and there are probably more flammulated owls in the Sierra Nevada and environs than we really give ourselves knowledge about. This one here is out of a little bit east of Lake Tahoe, and it's a summer resident. It was about 6,000 foot elevation. They prefer, it favors open mixed forests of black oak and pine. They feed on insects at night, mainly moths, and they nest in little groups. They're sort of, in some respect, like burrowing owls. They have these little family groups, and typically if you see one, if you slow down, take some time, you might see 2 or 3 others in the evening. So this is just an interesting owl. And as I mentioned a moment ago, their preferred habitat is aspen and black oak forest, the habitat where they like to breed. That particular photo there came out of a black oak with some cavity holes. You might be able to see them where my cursor is. Here's an aspen forest. This is out of Levining Canyon, going up towards Tioga Pass, where I had one years ago. So you can find them in the high Sierras, both on the east side and the west side. So flammulated owl is migratory. And here we are in California. Here you folks are, somewhere around in here, mid-range California. And you can see all the way up to Oregon, up into British Columbia, Idaho, Montana, a big stretch of eastern Oregon, and then interesting throughout Nevada, wherever there's high elevation and aspen forest, You'll find them there. Here's a population in Southern California, throughout Arizona, New Mexico. And let's see here. You can see their migration goes all the way down into El Salvador, Guatemala. It's really interesting how far south these guys go. And there's been quite a bit of studies on them. Quite a few birds have been banded. And now with the new Modus antennas, they're outfitting these little devices on them and getting even more information on their migration path and timing, and also what they're eating. So very interesting owl. Another great owl that you folks are very close to is through the southern entrance of Yosemite is the great gray owl, a year-round resident. It's a very sensitive species. The Park Service, Yosemite Park, National Park, doesn't like people reporting him on eBird. They don't want him reported at all. Some of the problem is photographers getting very close to them. And this bird does an east west migration, if you will, a downslope migration. You might find them in lower elevations in the winter this time of the year. But during the summer, spring and summer, their breeding time is generally wet habitats, mountain meadows that are wet. I see them sort of regularly on the north entrance, if you know where to look, and very high up around Nevada Falls in that glacier point. I've been very fortunate in finding them. Great gray owl. Mountain bluebirds. Mountain bluebird is a cavity nester. And so you can find them in the black oak and in the aspen forest that have a lot of dying trees and softwood, and have woodpecker holes that they can use for breeding. But you can also find them as far down as sagebrush. For instance, an area that's interesting is the entrance to Mono Lake County Park. You might find them in the sagebrush there. Another area is the Naval Beach in Mono Lake, and that's sagebrush habitat, and in the yellow pines a little bit further east. And of course, in the winter, large flocks come together, particularly after a big storm. Hopefully we'll have big storms this year. Supposed to have an El Nino. And they come down the east side of the Sierras, down slopes, seeking fruit. And Fresno, with all your agricultural industry, you probably get more mountain bluebirds than we do here. However, we do get mountain bluebirds into some of the eastern Bay counties like Santa Clara and Alameda, Contra Costa. They do come down in really storm years, big storms. They'll find their way in groups. So here's another eBird map, and you can see the breeding range of the mountain bluebird goes all the way into the spruce forest of Alaska, just about to Nome. Right about here is Nome, and they get that far up. I haven't seen them in the spruce forest. I do an annual trip into the spruce forest. This year will be my 24th year of going into Nome, into this particular ecosystem, which is the northern limit of the spruce forest. And we get a lot of different species there. Haven't seen a bluebird there, though. Then we come a little bit further down, and we see their year-round habitats in Northern California here, say from Alturas, very far north. They show maybe Lake Tahoe, maybe Alpine County. And then there's a big void here for year-round. I don't know if that's accurate, but I think I see them around Lone Pine, maybe even down into the road into Ridgecrest, but eBird has that as a void. And then you can see this non-breeding area goes all the way in the winter into central Mexico, into the higher elevation. So it's an interesting bird. It's a beautiful bird. Pine grosbeak is another favorite of mine that I try to seek out every year. I have two go-to locations for the pine grosbeak. They're both in northern Sierras. One is in Tuolumne Meadows. There's a population there that I've been seeing for probably 40 years. And a good spot to look for them in Tuolumne Meadows is in and around the campgrounds. They may be on the gravel roads, as this one is, picking up gravel to clean out their gizzards with the seeds that they eat. So that's a good spot to look for them. And the other spot that I have a regular small population is the east side of Sonora Pass. Obviously, both of those are north of you, but I travel Highway 395 in the summer, and sometimes I find myself coming over Walker Pass, going to Lake Isabella, coming through Bakersfield on my way home all the way up north. So I don't see why people in Fresno don't travel Highway 395 and might find themselves on Sonora Pass or Tuolumne Meadows in the summer. So look for pine grosbeak. It's a beautiful, colorful bird. So the pine grosbeak is found everywhere. And it's the species is an example of the Pan-Arctic species. It's all across the northern limits of the Earth. They're similar in their distribution to some of the rare birds that we'd like to see, like the wagtails, white wagtails, yellow wagtails, that are rarities in California, but they do get here, and weed eaters. So once again, Nome is about up here somewhere, and this is the end of the spruce forest. And you will see, I have seen them about 60 to 70 miles south of Nome on one of the interior mining roads, where there's just a very, very sparse showing of spruce trees, but the pine grosbeak shows itself there. And of course, throughout Canada, here's our little speck right here in California, the Sierra Nevadas, Rocky Mountains, through the plains of northern United States, the Dakotas, Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. Looks like the very tip of northern Illinois, and then all across Europe, Scandinavia, and into Asia, and then into Alaska. So the pine grosbeak is pretty well distributed, even though it may be a difficult bird for us in California to find. Evening grosbeak is another wanderer, probably more of a wanderer than the grosbeak. You can see the distribution here. Another eBird map, non-breeding in this area. I'm not quite sure this pink, not called out, but we have them throughout California. You find them in small groups. Here where I live, there's a certain tree, it's the Chinese pistache tree. And we've had luck with them finding those ornamental trees in urban areas, and 2 or 3, 4 birds, maybe sometimes more, just roaming around looking for seed bearing trees. So we do see them. I see them in throughout the Sierra Nevadas. It's always, I'm never really looking for them. They just sort of seem to be where I'm looking, and I find them. I've had them frequently in Yosemite Valley, almost every year that I go to the valley. But I've never really been looking for them. They're there, and I find them while I'm looking for another bird. So keep your eyes open for evening grosbeaks in the Yosemite area, down into Bass Lake. And I've had them in Sequoia National Park this last 2 years ago, 2020. I made a trip there, and I had them in the park. Evening grosbeaks. Calliope hummingbird, another favorite for the Sierra Nevadas. Look for them in wet meadows, in willows. That's what they prefer. Although I have one up here at a feeder. That's always nice if you have feeders. Watch for Calliope hummingbird. Nashville warbler is another favorite bird of mine. The fall migration and winter habitat is familiar to the flammulated owl. They go all the way down into Guatemala, parts of Belize, throughout Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, and into El Salvador. You can see them on the east side of the Sierras. I've had them in Yosemite Valley, and a good place to find them in Yosemite Valley is at the emergency helicopter landing station. There's a hiking trail through there. You can't, go past their emergency markers where they don't want hikers in, but there is some trails there that has an annual nesting population of the Nashville warbler. I've got to go back there just for 1 minute. I saw something. Yeah, Nashville. Thank you. So here's the distribution of the Nashville warbler. You can see its migration is all the way into Guatemala right here, and a little touch here into El Salvador. And I've had them in Belize, not many. They do a large migration across the Caribbean into South Texas, High Island. You'll see them there. And you can see them coming up in the spring in California. They use the coastal migration path. And then, of course, we have them nesting throughout the season. And the migration, like Point Reyes, is a good spot to see them in the fall. So it's a long distance migrant and a really large distribution across the lower 48 in North America. Hermit warbler. The hermit warbler is partial to tall conifers. Post-breeding in July, they move upslope into the red fir and subpine alpine forests of the Sierras. Another bird with a tiny little warbler. I've actually seen this bird in Panama, right down in here. It was a rare bird in Panama, but we had it. You can see that distribution throughout Mexico, along the coastline, in through Guatemala, and down into El Salvador, and even one made its way into Panama. So here, where we are in the Sierra Nevadas, we look for them in the April-May timeframe when they start to nest, and watch for them post-breeding in the higher alpine forest. But in post-breeding too, in reading up on the bird, they do get down into shrubs and bushes. They're not necessarily up high when in post-breeding. They favor the higher perch and nesting habitat in the pines during the breeding season. And once they start to come down slope, they will come into shrubs and lower vegetation. So keep your eyes open at all elevations, anywhere from April into August, September, for the hermit warbler. Dippers, you can't go into the Sierra Nevadas without wanting to find a dipper, whether it's a day trip or a week long. This nest right here is on Tioga Pass Road, Lee Vining Creek. And this bird here, I believe, is around Lake Tahoe. So the dippers, and of course we can find them in Yosemite Valley. They're common there. They're well adapted to these cold mountain streams. The dipper on average has 4,200 more feathers than a robin. They have a lot of down. They're really packed in. And they do winter in high elevation cold streams. There's reports in Colorado of seeing 5, 10, 15 in a little open patch of a stream that is otherwise frozen in, and they drop their territorial instincts and they come together and winter out in these little open patches. So we look for them in the summer. I do when I'm in the Yosemite Valley under little bridges, and part of that is get rid of that window. Part of that whole strategy is they can't take higher temperatures. They start to hyperventilate, and there's been records of them having heart attacks if it gets too hot and there's no shade for them. And even though their legs and feet are in the cold water, the body with all those feathers and the down can really cause them to pass on. But a wonderful bird. And of course, it's John Muir's favorite bird. We can't talk about the Sierra Nevadas without talking about John Muir. And his sketches of the Dipper were interesting. If anyone has ever seen his journals in person. Just a quick note on John Muir. His journals are kept at the University of the Pacific in Stockton in their special collection library. And also for people that are into botany, all of John Muir's pressings of plants are also at the University of Pacific Library in the special collections. Something that maybe you want to just know about if you're visiting Stockton. This is my rarest observation in the Sierra Nevadas, a summer tanager. Just seen it once. It was a flyby. Got to see it. Got to get a photo. This was on Sonora Pass, Highway 108, in the late summer of 2015. Summer tanager. I'm getting word from another Audubon Society from Central Valley, Stanislaus County, Stanislaus Audubon Society, and they had in one of their state parks in the county this year, 2023, they had summer tanager nesting. So maybe with this climate change, the birds are coming north looking for habitat where they can breed and maybe not have those hot temperatures that we've been witnessing, like in Arizona, Southern California, New Mexico, Mexico. California spotted owl is a bird that's under a lot of pressure. I think we all know the story about the northern spotted owl. Habitat destruction is the big key, and of course, the influx of the barred owl coming in from the north and from the east. This photo is out of Calaveras County in Big Tree State Park. Distribution map of spotted owls. So here where I live, we have the northern spotted owl in Marin County. In the Sierra Nevadas, we have the California northern spotted owl, two different subspecies. And a lot of U.S. Forest Service work has been done on the California spotted owl. I think it was 1997, 1998, I was able to get a contract with U.S. Forest Service in the Sequoia National Forest, and they were planning to do a logging. And at that time, President Clinton and the conservation community was pushing for a Sequoia National Monument, which was going to put certain regulations and restrictions on logging, which was going to save habitat for the California spotted owl. I was able to find them, and we moused them, and they would come down and get the mice, and we would band them. And of course, now we have, after some 25 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, 27, 28 years, we now have a Sequoia National Park. And I haven't seen the California spotted owl recently in the park. I was there a few years ago, but it has to be a good stronghold. There were quite a few nesting pairs 25 years ago, and the forest hasn't really been logged. So there's been some severe fires that are worse than the logging because it really destroys the soil. But California northern spotted owl, Sierra bird. A little bit more on the spotted owl versus the barred owl. Some of you may subscribe and be members of the Cornell Labs, and they do a really fine publication called The Living Bird. And here recently, they did a very good article on the spotted owl versus barred owl. Okay, on the left is our California spotted owl. On the right is the barred spotted owl. Barred spotted owl is a little bit larger than the California and the northern spotted owl, and much more aggressive. And biologists biologists, ornithologists in the northern forest and in the Sierra Nevadas have documented when the barred owl starts calling. When they invade the forest, they invade the habitat, and they start calling, the spotted owl becomes silent, and it affects their breeding cycle. They may not be able to find partners, and it may reduce the breeding for a season. There has been a number of those of you that are really into conservation and do a lot of reading. Forest Service, Park Services are really taking some strong measures to reduce the barred owl population in California. It's very strong in Oregon. The birds we get in the Sierra Nevada and in the eastern coastal populations all come through Oregon. And there's been a lot of discussion in a number of conservation magazines, birding listservs about grassland birds starting to disappear. Well, some of the impact on grassland birds through the prairie states is our trees coming in, both through urban areas and ranchers planting trees. And this barred owl has been able to hopscotch its way through the prairie using these small groves of trees and found itself into Montana. It got into the bigger conifer forests, moved into Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and now we have them threatening our spotted owls in California. The interesting thing about barred owl, some of you may know Keith Hansen, the artist. Several weeks ago, we had a barred owl, and a lot of birders got to see it. It was at a very low perch. And talking to Keith Hansen about it, the barred owl gets its name not from these streaks, but on the forehead down into the nape, it's barred. So that's how the barred owl gets its name, through the forehead and all the way down into the back of the head, which is the nape. Otherwise, it's pretty streaky. So that's something to remember. Okay, I'm going to stay on this topic just for another minute. So researchers now are using the new AI, the artificial intelligence technology that's getting a lot of press, but we're using it in conservation to ID spotted owl territories with their calls. And of course, obviously they'll record barred owl calls too. And from that, they'll take whatever measures and studies that they have assigned themselves to move forward in conservation of our spotted owl. Okay, back to the Cornell Living Bird magazine. If you want more data on it, the fall issue, I think it came out in October, on page 50 has a really great article. I recommend everyone that goes into the Sierra Nevadas birding to read this article and get a good perspective on the conservation issues at hand with the spotted owl and what our agencies are doing to reduce the impact. Very good article. Okay, this is it. I don't know how long we took it. We've got a really good showing of people. Thank you. 30 people showed up. Yellow Bill Tours is thanking you for attending tonight. If you're interested in what I do and how I do it, where I go and when I go there, you can go to my website for information for the out-of-state trips from the tundra of Alaska to the Andes Mountains of Colombia. And also, if you have more detail, you need more detailed information, you can email me, and I'll be happy to take time with you. So thank you very much for bringing me on board tonight. It's been a lot of fun, and if there's some chat stuff, we can handle that. Rachel?
Well, thank you so much, Rich. So I'm going to go ahead and check here in the chat box to see if we have any questions yet. Oh, it looks like something just popped up. Okay, Valerie is asking, how large is the flammulated owl?
Small. It is really tiny. It's maybe bigger than a robin, maybe a little bit more J size without the long tail, but that bottle. Okay, if you take a bottle of water, I think it's about a 10-ounce bottle, but if you just look at that, the size, the configuration of a water bottle, that's about the size of a flammulated owl. They're that small, and of course there are a lot of feathers, so they don't have a very large body. The feathers are the biggest portion of their statement.
Okay, let's see if we have any other questions or comments. If anyone has any questions, any comments, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat box. Okay, so I'll give it a moment here, but I'm not seeing anything else yet. Yeah, sometimes it takes people a few moments to drop their questions in, so we'll give it just a little bit of time.
Yeah, there's no rush.
Okay.
I'm drinking water. It's not white wine. It is in a wine glass that will be filled shortly.
Another moment. Okay.
Lowell, are you there? Can you hear me? My friend Lowell.
Let me see if I see him on here. I am not seeing him here among the participants.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
You can never lose Lowell.
Yeah, I'm kind of like old bubble gum, you know, double bubble,
Yeah.
you step on me and you're stuck for life.
Yeah, I love Lowell. He and I have been friends for I don't know how long.
Ooh, okay.
Long
Good
time.
seeing you, Lowell. Actually, I just saw him at the Central Valley Birding Symposium. So, but I'm still not tired of seeing you, Lowell.
Well,
All right.
thanks.
We have a question and a comment here in this one chat. It says, thank you very much. Linda says, thank you very much for this informative talk. In your years of observation, what dramatic changes in habitat have you seen?
Well, fires. These huge fires in the Sierras are just wiping out so much habitat. And of course, the drought, allowing the bark beetles to come in and just destroy so much of the forest. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, I hope we really have a good El Nino, because a lot of our lakes and reservoirs in the Sierras have really suffered. Some of them, you know, have just turned into mud flats. I'm a member of the Mono Lake Committee, and their publication is a good one for just measuring moisture and water coming out of the Sierras. And it looks like these last storms we had in March of this year are really feeding the lake and a lot of the streams. So it might be a good year in the Eastern Sierras with a lot of water coming through the streams in the willow patches. You know, the warblers and vireos love the willow patches. So anyone birding in the Eastern Sierra and Western Sierras, willow patches might be a good habitat to really seek out this year. But overall, I think the fires and the drought have really changed quite a bit of the habitat. And we're seeing new species coming in. As I mentioned earlier, the summer tanager nesting in Stanislaus County. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So global warming is going to impact species that we see. And maybe some species will leave us and go further north. What happens if we lose all of the Williamson sapsuckers and they go north? So there is things going on right in front of us.
Okay, so Valerie says, thank you. And I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. Does anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat box. And Rich, I'm going to ask you a question of my own here.
Sure.
So I know the gray flycatcher, that's one that it's kind of tough to catch. I know during spring migration, there's a certain, at least around here locally, well, particularly like in the Central Sierra, like more toward the foothills, especially, there's a certain window of time where you have to catch them. I think it's mid to late April. But as far as their breeding in the Sierra Nevada, do you know of any areas where they breed reliably? I know they'd be kind of more like of a Southern Sierra or an Eastern Sierra thing, but do you know of any areas offhand where they can be reliably found during the breeding season?
No, that's a really good question. Making me think. I see them on migration going through. I have never found one nesting. That's
Okay.
interesting. I have had them nest in far northeastern California, but not
Oh.
the Sierras. They come through Marin County where I live, not in big numbers, and they keep going. So there's some breeding bird atlases going on throughout the state. And of course, eBird would give you some input on that. But I have never run into a nesting gray flycatcher in the Sierras or the foothills during
Okay.
that season.
Okay.
No.
Good to know.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions here at the moment. And I do think we've probably given people enough time. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of close this down. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you again, Rich, for the first and foremost. Thank you again, Rich, for the wonderful presentation. It was great. I definitely learned a lot from that. I always love hearing about the birds of my beloved Sierra Nevada. And thank you to everyone who attended this evening. We certainly appreciate that. Just as a quick reminder, if you are not already, please follow Fresno Audubon on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We also have our YouTube channel. That's a great place to check out general meetings that you may have missed, and we'll be posting this one on there sometime in the next few days as well. We do hope that you'll all join us for next month's general meeting, which is scheduled for Tuesday, January 9th. International guide Benny Jacob Schwartz will be talking to us about bringing birds to the garden with a native California plant. So that should be a very interesting presentation. And we do have a handful of comments here. I'll go ahead and read those off. Marley says, thank you for all the good information, especially the wonderful pictures. Cheryl says, thank you. Bambi says, thank you as well. Kiana and Aaron also say thank you. All right, well, thank you again.
Everyone. And everyone have a great weekend.